Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I am beginning the first part of the session. Remember, since the last session, we decided that this program, this fortnightly presentation is going to have 4 parts. The first of them is going to comprise of description of some passage of the Quran. In the second part, we will talk about one aspect of understanding of religion, and then I will talk about some aspect of some problem in the contemporary times that has got to do with Islamic understanding, and the fourth is going to be devoted to a question answer session. So we had reached Surah Al-An'am, which is the 6th surah of the Quran. What I am doing is that I am picking a few verses, a few passages from the Quran in a sequence to just give a translation and a brief understanding of them. What I have chosen for today is verses 54 and 55 of Surah Al-An'am. It says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وَإِذَا جَاءَكَ الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِآيَاتِنَا. The verse is addressing the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, and it's saying that when those people who believe in our verses, they come to you, فَقُلْ سَلَامٌ عَلَيْكُمْ. O Prophet, tell them, Salamun alaykum. May peace be upon you. That is, welcome them, treat them politely, encourage them. Kataba rabbukum ala nafsihi rahma. And tell them that your Lord has made it binding on himself. He has undertaken, promised, ala nafsihi rahma, that he is going to be merciful. He is going to treat people mercifully. Annahu man amila minkum su'an. And the explanation of it is this, that whoever does anything evil, bijahalatin, emotionally, as a consequence of emotions, that is, one is overwhelmed by emotions. Thumma taba, and then he repents, min badihi, after that, wa aslaha, and corrects himself. Fannahu ghafurur rahim, then God is going to be forgiving, merciful. That is, the Almighty is asking the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, to let believers know that he likes them, he loves them, he is merciful, he is kind. And it is a consequence of his kindness that he has decided that whoever does anything wrong and evil, as humans we are weak, we can do things wrong. We shouldn't do them knowingly and deliberately. But it's a fact that being humans, we can always do things that are wrong. If we do them because we are overwhelmed by emotions, because we are overcome by the evilness of circumstances, and then we repent and correct ourselves, and they will find God forgiving and merciful. وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَسِّرُ الْآيَاتِ. And he says that that's the way we have clarified our verses, our signs, وَلِتَسْتَبِينَ السَّبِيلُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ, so that the path of the righteous is clarified, as well as the path of those who are evil is clarified as well. That is...
sorry to interrupt, Khalid Sahab. Are you...
Right. Please go ahead.
Are you sharing your moment?
I'm sharing what?
Your screen.
I am sharing my screen. That's what I'm doing.
Because if you are showing us any verses on your
I'm not. No, 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 no. That is
oh no,
what
okay.
that is what should happen from your side if it's possible,
Oh, all right, okay.
right? So right now I am reading out verses 55 and 50, sorry, 54 and 55 of Surah Anam, the sixth surah,
Okay. Thank you.
right? So what I was saying was that the Almighty here is clarifying that through this clear mention of his scheme, his law, he is also clarifying as to what is the path of those who are evil and what is the path of the people who are righteous. Righteous people are not the ones who will never ever commit sins, but they are the ones who, whenever they take a wrong turn, they come back. They take a wrong turn because they are sometimes overcome by emotions. Sometimes circumstances lead them to slip, to fall. But because they are righteous, because they are basically good, the Almighty enables them to repent, to come back to the good ways, righteous ways. And those who are evil are the ones who do things wrong and they continue doing them wrong. That's one passage that I wanted to talk about. The other passage is the same chapter, Surah 1, Surah number 6, Al-An'am, verse 125. In verse 125, the Almighty is saying, فَمَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَن يَهْدِيَهُ. Surah Al-An'am, verse 125 says, whoever God Almighty decides about him, أَن يَهْدِيَهُ, that he is going to guide him. يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ, he opens his heart for Islam. وَمَن يُرِدْ, and the one for whom he decides أَن يُضِلَّهُ, that he is going to misguide him, يَجْعَلْ صَدْرَهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا, he makes his heart constrained. His heart is not open for the truth. It is when the mention of Islam and its teachings is made, his heart is not comfortable. كَأَنَّمَا يَسَّعَدُ فِي السَّمَاءِ, as if he is moving upwards, rising upwards in altitude. We know that when we go upwards, move upwards, higher in altitude, because there is less oxygen, it is difficult for people to breathe. That is why they take with themselves oxygen to be able to breathe properly. So the Almighty says that the one about whom He decides that He is not going to guide them, their hearts become constrained. They don't remain open. They become uncomfortable, as if they are rising upwards towards the sky. So, in other words, what the Almighty is saying is that when God's message is presented before those people about whom He has decided that they're going to be guided, when the message of guidance is presented before them, they feel comfortable, they feel good about it, and they find the mentions of the Almighty's text, His word, comforting them. It's as if they are inclined towards it. However, those people about whom the Almighty has decided that they won't be guided, they find when the message is mentioned to them as if they're feeling uncomfortable. It's difficult for them to breathe properly. Now, why does it happen? Why does the Almighty choose for some people that they be guided and they feel comfortable with it, and for others that they be misguided or they be not be guided and they feel uncomfortable when the message is mentioned before them? The Almighty says, كَذَلِكَ يَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ الرِّجْسَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Likewise, the Almighty casts filth around those who don't want to believe. In other words, it is the filth, the dirt of misdeeds of humans that causes people to not believe and to not be guided. This is a consistent theme of the Quran, which is repeated over and over again, that if you are a genuinely good person, you are going to be guided by the Almighty. And if there is somebody who is bad, evil, mean, corrupt, unfair, is tyrant, is lying, cheating, causing harm to others, filthy, obscene, and is not repentant, is not regretful, then such people would find that their filth is not going to allow them to get the message. They will be deprived of it and they will not believe. So, in other words, it is God's decision to guide whom He wants and to misguide whom He wants, but God takes this decision on the basis of His understanding as to who are the people who are good and who are not. One last thing that I would want to clarify in this particular context is the fact that let us not be judgmental about people. This statement in this verse has been made when the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, himself was delivering the message. When he was delivering it, the message was delivered in its very best, pristine, clear form. The person delivering it was the best of humans, and the way it was being delivered was very effective, most beautifully done, and there were no problems for people to understand the message. Today, this message is being conveyed by people like me. The character is suspect, the presentation is not very effective, and therefore, if there are people who are not acknowledging it and following it, they should not be blamed. We should blame ourselves for not doing enough, for not presenting the message properly. That's one of the problems that we sometimes have while we read the Quran. Some people, they understand it in a manner that instead of being good to others, they somehow become judgmental, somehow become self-righteous. They claim they are good and others are all misguided. That is not how God's religion should be presented. That was the first part. Now I come to the second part of my presentation, which has got to do with the question of hadith. Remember that during the course of these presentations, I have been introducing you to the different sources of learning religion. An important source of religious knowledge is the Quran. We've talked about it at length. There is another important source of religious guidance, which is the Sunnah. We have talked about it at length as to what constitutes Sunnah and what is not Sunnah. Now we are talking about another important source of religious understanding, which is hadith. Because we have limited time for discussion, I will talk about hadith today, some part of my presentation, and another part of my presentation on hadith is going to be done in the subsequent lecture, hopefully, inshallah. 2 weeks from now. Uh, the discussion of hadith is a natural consequence of discussion on sunnah. There are many Muslims who incorrectly uh, consider sunnah and hadith to be the same. The fact of the matter is that we've already talked about sunnah, which are religious practices the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, performed himself and communicated to others and communicated practically. Now we are talking about hadith, which is a natural source of knowledge that came about as a consequence of the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, being witnessed, observed by a large number of his followers who believed in him. How could it be possible that the companions of the Prophet, who saw him in their midst for years, saw him doing things, practicing religion, facing different circumstances, how is it possible that after he left this world, they would not have shared this information about him with others? So, the way hadith emerged was actually a natural way, an understandable reason. So, what happened was that this religion, core religion that we have with us in the Quran and in the Sunnah, that religion got understood, explained, practiced in the ideal form by the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him. He was the model. He was the one who presented religion in its pristine form, explained it in the best possible manner, clarified it in a way nobody else could do it. So, some people, some companions, not all of them, and they shared some information, not the entire information of his life, with some people belonging to the next generation. This is what obviously is natural, it's quite understandable. And those people who got this information from the companions, the first generation Muslims, they shared with the next generation, some people belonging to the next generation. So, quite apart from the core religion of Quran and Sunnah, there was this information attributed to the Prophet that was also shared with some people belonging to the subsequent generations of Muslims. Until such time that in the 3rd century Hijrah, there were some scholars who worked hard, invested their entire lifetime to find out as to which of these pieces of information that are claiming that the Prophet said such and such thing, or did something, prayed in a certain way, etc. What part of this information is reliable, is worthy of being taken seriously? This investigation was done by quite a number of scholars, and what they did was that whatever information they gathered, and they felt that this information was reliable and worthy of being shared with the Muslim Ummah, they compiled their information, the information that they gathered, in books. and those books were called books of hadith. Hadith is a statement, you know, and it has now become a term which means uh, a claim made by some scholars that the Prophet of God, may Allah's mercy be on him, said such and such thing or did such and such thing. This is what hadith is. Now, when a person says that the Prophet said such and such thing, he cannot make that claim unless the claim is supported by his supporting argument, is supported by evidence, which evidence gives reason to the individual to feel confident that it's very likely that he had said such thing. Now, that evidence is what is called isnad, sanad, which is the names of people who were involved in transmitting the information of hadith, right from the companion who mentioned it to the people in the following generations who transmitted it. So, all names of people who were involved in the process of transmitting that information, they are mentioned by the muhaddith, the scholar who compiled information, and then he got it published, disseminated to different parts of the Muslim world. Now, this information of isnad, of the people who were involved, is what constitutes one important part of hadith. So, a hadith is comprised of two components. It has a matan, which is the text, and it has isnad, the names of people who were involved in transmitting this hadith from one generation to the other. That's what hadith is. Hadith is not just a statement attributed to the Prophet. Without the evidence, without the support of the names, it's an incomplete presentation. Now, where do we get hadith from? Where do we get it from? Well, we get it from the books of hadith. There are a number of books of hadith which were compiled by those who, as I said, who worked hard, invested a good part of their lives to collect those pieces of information. So we have, for example, a book of hadith attributed to Imam Bukhari, whose book of hadith is considered to be the most reliable. He is the one who was born in 187 Hijrah and he died in 247 Hijrah. So, the book must have been made available sometime close to his death, let's say in the 230s, if not early 240s, which really means that it was more than 200 years after the demise of the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, that his book was presented to the Muslim Ummah in the form of a well designed, well arranged book. Likewise, is Muslim, Imam Muslim. He is also credited for presenting a number of other ahadith which he investigated, whose narrators, and then presented his work. He was born in 194 Hijrah and he died in 252 Hijrah. And likewise, there are other muhaddithin, Tirmizi, Nasai, Dawood, Ibn Majah, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and Mawta, Imam Malik. Now, these are a few names. Probably we'll talk more about them. But the last thing that I would mention in this particular presentation of on Hadith, because as I said, I have to take another session for my brief discussion on Hadith to get completed. But the last thing that I want to say today is that when we scrutinize Hadith, when we try to form an opinion as to whether what has been mentioned in Hadith is reliable or not, there are two criteria, there are two principles applying. One criterion is the criterion of riwayat. The criterion of riwayat, when it is applied, what is done is that all the names that are involved in the chain of narrators, those names, those individuals, they are scrutinized. Their character, their knowledge, their memory, etc. So, this is one important criterion. And allow me to say that this criterion of scrutinizing the reliability or otherwise of a hadith has become more prominent, more popular. So, when a muhaddith, a scholar who has compiled a book of hadith, he makes a statement that a particular hadith is sahih, and therefore he has accommodated the statement, the piece of information in his book. What he's actually saying is that to his knowledge, to his satisfaction, all 4 or 5 narrators in the chain were reliable people. To his knowledge, to his understanding, to his satisfaction, they were reliable. So, for example, when Imam Bukhari says that certain hadith that I have accommodated in my book is a reliable hadith, what he actually means is that when he heard it from A, and A heard it from B, and B heard it from C, and C heard it from D, and D heard it from, let's say, a companion, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, what Imam Bukhari is saying is that A, whom he met, and B, whom he didn't meet, and C and D, they were all reliable people to the best of his knowledge, to the best of his research and investigation. This subject is obviously, it deserves to be discussed in more detail. I've mentioned some part of it, but the other part is what I will mention 2 Sundays from now, inshallah. Now I have been assigned the task of talking about one important contemporary issue. Remember the last time I mentioned about gays and lesbians? Today I'm going to talk about democracy in Islam. When we are living as a community, as a group of people, and we have to, or we are expected to practice Islam, or we have to lead a life and take our decisions in a way that those decisions are in accordance with the principles of Islam. One important principle that has been mentioned in the Quran is the one that has been mentioned in Surah Shura. This surah is Surah number 42, chapter 42, and the verse is 38. The Almighty has mentioned that good believers who have responded to the invitation extended to them by the Almighty through His Messenger, they are the ones who say their prayers regularly. As-salat, yuqeemun as-salat. And the Quran mentions it over and over again, that believers are the ones who, true believers, are the ones who say their prayers and who pay zakat. The words sometimes change. They say their prayers and they spend in the way of God. They help out the poor. Mimma razaqnahum yunfiqun. What we have given them in the form of resources, in the form of sustenance, they spend a part of it. It comes together. These two features of a believer, these two attributes, they together, they complete the picture of a believer. However, in this particular verse that I have referred to, what the Almighty has done is that He has mentioned the fact that believers are the ones who say their prayers regularly, is mentioned as point number 1. And what we have given them as resources, sustenance, they spend in the way of charity and for pleasing God. This point has been mentioned as point number 3. In the middle of the two, as point number 2, the Almighty has mentioned وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ, and their decisions are based on their consultation. That is, whenever they decide on the basis of mutual consultation. In other words, for Muslims to decide about their matters, they've got to consult each other, discuss, and then come to some conclusion. In other words, dictatorship, one man rule, or one party rule, a few people dictating their understanding on all other people belonging to a community or a society. This style, this model is not Islamic at all. Now, how should consultation take place? Well, it's something which would vary from situation to situation, from era to era, from place to place. There was a time when people belonging to a community were very few. Therefore, consulting them all directly was a possibility. But now we are moving towards times when the populations are large, and not everybody can be consulted directly. So, it makes a lot of sense that every individual is involved in the process of choosing people who will be their representatives, who in turn are going to go to a legislative assembly, to a place where they will discuss the different aspects of running the affairs of the state, and they will also decide on the basis of mutual consultation. That is what the Quran is saying. Amruhum shura bainahum. Their decisions are based on mutual consultation. Democracy has many problems. Democracy, understandably, has many weaknesses. Democracy needs to be improved and reformed. However, the basic principle of democracy is exactly what the Quran says, and that is Amruhum Shura Bainahum. If there is going to be an individual who will take decisions, no matter how pious that individual is, on the basis of his own whims, even if he consults people, but ultimately takes his own decisions, this is not what the Quran is saying. The Quran is not saying that good rulers are the ones who just consult people and then go about doing what they think is right. It says, Amruhum, their decisions, Shura Bainahum, are based on their mutual consultation. In other words, the mutual consultation is what decides what their decisions are, what the line should be adopted uh, by, by the society, by the community, by the country. So, uh, democracy, uh, a refined democracy, a democracy where people should be allowed to speak, give their own opinions, and consultation is done in a manner that people are not stopped from saying what they want to say, and people are not forced to form opinions other than what they think is right. I think this is what needs to be done, and a reformed democracy is what should ultimately be the goal that we should be trying to achieve. Just final word. Uh, there are people who say that the Quran is telling us that the majority of the people can never be right. Honestly, the passages that people refer to, where such statements, similar statements are made, it's talking about a particular period when the prophets were delivering the message and there were many people who were not accepting it. It's in that scenario that it has been mentioned, not in a situation where you have to rule over others, you have to take decisions about others. Those decisions are actually to be taken on the basis of consultation. And a consultation can take any form. So, whatever is the most effective form with least possible problems, possible uh, possibilities of corruption, of people uh, not getting to the right understanding, or being or are influenced by the outside factors, those possibilities should be attempted to be minimized. But that's the only proper Islamic way of conducting the affairs of any collectivity, any group, whether it's a club, whether it's an organization where decisions are to be taken, or whether it's a country where laws are to be made. They have always got to be made on the basis of mutual consultation. Uh, Now I am available for question answers. That's the last part of this program.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Saab. It's been- Hello, Dr. Saab, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Sorry, it may be a bit noisy right now.
No worries.
Okay, so the question that I want to ask is, you talked about how Quran tells us that this is the system that we should use to govern ourselves, to make our decisions. To refer to uh, these are just three words from that verse, and this verse would have been revealed, during the time of the Prophet. When the Prophet is present, they are not just going to discuss matter amongst themselves and decide, right? So the Prophet himself is the person who is the decision maker. So in the kind of presence of the Prophet, if a verse like this is revealed, how can it tell people that, okay, you go and decide your affairs amongst yourself. Because if that were the case, as we saw after the death of the Prophet, Muslim became seriously divided. They couldn't decide to inherit authority. Even the majority group, the Sunni group, that somehow, let's say, if we could argue that they agreed upon some method of choosing a person, or they chose a person to lead them, uh, they themselves did not remain a single group. They have continued to split, and there is no shortage of groups within Sunnis as well. So if it was possible, based on just 3 words from this one verse, uh, for Muslims to govern themselves based on mutual consultation, then we would not have seen the situation today. So then the only time when Muslims were united, when they were with the Prophet, who was a single person, who was a single point of authority, and he was able to make all the decisions for them. So what would you say to that?
You see, there are a few things that need to be clarified. One is that when the Prophet, may God mercy be on him, was present himself, obviously he was the one who was to be followed. Why? Because he was the one who was chosen by the Almighty for him to receive the Almighty's message and to deliver to people. And following him meant following God. And therefore, there was no question that if he said something in religion as a religious expectation, that people could have disagreed with him. However, even in his case, the Almighty asked him to seek the mashwara, the understanding and views of others. So people did chip in with their opinions, and the Prophet used to decide. So it was a way of enabling people to get used to the process of giving opinions and forming opinions. So the Quran mentioned in Surah Al Imran, the 3rd chapter, Shawirhum fil amr, consult them in matters. Faiza azamta, however, when you take a decision, fatawakkal ala Allah, then have trust in God. Some people have misunderstood this passage of Surah Al Imran to be the way that later people should also be approaching matters of decision making. Leaders should behave the same way, that they should take the opinions of people, but then they should finally decide on their own. As I said, the verse of Surah Shura, the 38th verse of chapter 42, is actually giving the right approach of decision making when it comes to a situation where the Prophet is not there himself. In the presence of the Prophet, obviously it's God's word that should prevail. But in his absence, the general principle has been made over there in Surah Shura. So these are two different possibilities, and obviously they have got to be different. Now, let's come to the question of what happened to Muslims. You see, the Quran is not responsible for what Muslims did. The Quran is only telling us what the Muslims should do. If they will do the way the Almighty mentions, then things will go in the right way. If they will not do what the Almighty is asking them to do, then obviously things are going to not be going in the right direction. Having said that, I must also emphasize that the manner, the first few, let's say 4 Khulafa, the Muslim rulers were chosen, was precisely the same way. The first of the 4, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when he was chosen, uh, there was a discussion that took place in Thaqifa Bani Sa'ida immediately after the demise of the Prophet, where the discussion was as to which of the groups should lead Muslims, should rule over Muslims. There were some amongst the Ansar, uh, the people who were originally living in Yasrib, Medina, and Muhajireen had come from Mecca. There were some from amongst the original inhabitants of Medina, the Ansar, who thought that it was their right to rule over Muslims. But then they were reminded of the statement of the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, who is reported to have said that the leadership of Muslims should belong to the Quraysh. And he clarified, the Prophet clarified that it is because of their popularity. It is because of the fact that the majority of people in the Arabian Peninsula, they follow Quraysh. When the Quraysh were in the period of ignorance, Jahiliyyah, even then the majority of the people followed them, and now even in Islam. In other words, the Prophet himself, based on the Quranic ruling or the Quranic verse, that it is to be decided on the basis of mutual consultation, which in some cases would mean it should be decided on the basis of the majority opinion as to what decision is to be taken and who is going to rule. He, before leaving this world, he gave this guidance, important guidance to Muslims, that this should be conferred, this right, or call it obligation or status, should be conferred to the people of Quraysh, who were the ones about whom the majority of the people living in the Arabian Peninsula were comfortable with, wanted them to lead. Now, if there were disputes amongst Muslims, there were many reasons. And obviously, one of the reasons was that they did not continue to follow the principle of mutual consultation. But there were other reasons also. There were extraneous factors that influenced the situation. The information was not available to everybody the way, had it been available, there would have been fewer disputes. And let's not also forget the fact that let's not forget the fact that there were hypocrites around. There were Jews who got involved in making information available in a way that would cause misunderstandings, etc. So there could be a number of reasons why Muslims of the later times faced difficulties, and obviously, let's face it, some of them did not follow the ruling of the Quran. So the Quran is the book of guidance, and what Muslims did is their history. So let's not understand Islam through Muslim history.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Shah. So I'll ask a second question as well, unless somebody else wants to ask a question. So my second question is about your previous presentation, which was hadith. So when you, for example, say that 200 years later, Imam Bukhari did the work of collecting all of these hadiths and then verifying them and establishing their isnad, it almost sounds like that all of it was done at this point of time, at least as in 200 years later. But when you pick up a book written by these hadith scholars who defend the position of hadith and the fact that we can actually rely upon that information, they talk about whole generations engaged in the process of not only narrating those hadith, but memorizing them, establishing study circles, and then teaching their students. And in almost an organic process, just like they were busy communicating Quran, they were also busy communicating hadith. So in every kind of generation, we can kind of trace people, and not one but many people who were passing on this information. So why would we say that hadith is any less when it comes to transmission than Quran? And should we really say that it was compiled 200 years later?
You see, what I stated is a statement of fact that the book compiled by Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, and others was presented in the 3rd century Hijrah. I mentioned before you the years of birth and death of the two most prominent of the scholars of Hadith. My statement did not negate what you are saying. Quite obviously, if there were people who were in custody of Hadith in the 1st generation, 2nd generation, 3rd generation, and 4th generation of Muslims, they must have discussed it. They must have taught it to others. But this information and the manner it was being taught and shared with others, it did not make the information available to the entire Ummah. And moreover, the information that was available with one group of scholars of Hadith was different from information that was available to others. So imagine that the Quran was available to everybody, all Muslims from day one, A to Z. It was fully preserved. Wherever Muslims went to, they went with the Quran and they went with Sunnah. They went with prayers, 5-time prayers. They went with fasting. They went with Jummah. They went with the prayer of Janaza, etc. But as I said in my presentation about Hadith, there were so many things that people observed from the Prophet, which he said, which he did. He didn't ask everybody to make note of it and to mention it to the later people. Some people observed him saying and doing things, and they chose to transmit them to others. It was brilliant. I think we should be thankful to those people. But let's face it, what they did, A, was not available to everybody in the 1st generation, 2nd generation, 3rd generation, and 4th generation of the Muslim Ummah. By far the best generations amongst in the history of Muslims. In actual fact, I can say with absolute confidence that whatever Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu has narrated, that entire stuff was not even known to Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhu, because they were present with the Prophet on some occasions, but they weren't present with him on other occasions. And not everything that he said and not everything that he did has been transmitted. I mean, you know that the Prophet, he migrated from Mecca to Medina with Abu Bakr. The two were there by themselves and there was no third with them. The Almighty says the third was he, God himself. But we have no details, no description of how this journey went about. What did the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, said to Abu Bakr? Why? Because Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu didn't choose to share it with others. Only God, he mentioned a few things about that journey in Surah Tawbah. So what I'm saying is that hadith got compiled in a natural way, but it was a human effort. We're going to talk more about it in the next session as well. And therefore, its position in understanding Islam is not the same as the position of the Quran and Sunnah. What exactly is its position? Let's wait for a while. In the next session, I'll explain what is the role of hadith in understanding Islam.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Sam. Unless anybody else has any questions, we could close the session here. So, does anybody want to ask any questions? All right. So it seems like that we don't have any questions anymore for today. So thank you for that, Dr. Sam.
Thank you very much for your presence, for your patience.
Inshallah, we will reconvene in 2 weeks.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The righteous are not those who never go astray. Fine. What happens when people disagree with you and believe in their own Imam? What happens? Nothing. I mean, they have their own choice. They understand what they think is right, and let them do what they think is right. We cannot stop them from believing in and practicing what they think is right. You've only stated one principle regarding the testing of authenticity of hadith, reliability of the chain of narratives. Please do explain the other principle. Just wait for another 2 weeks and inshallah I'll mention it later. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's not working.